Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Welcome to Franchise Fridays. And Neema, what's going on?
How's it going? I'm doing all right. I'm ready for my semester to end. So
definitely, it's coming up soon for the both of us. Just on this beautiful Friday, we have maybe a couple more days left until the end of the semester and summer break, and of course, just more Gen Z podcast network goodness. So really excited for that coming up. Today's episode is the first episode of Franchise Fridays. I'm super excited about it. Basically, we'll be having our other Gen Z podcast hosts like Neema coming on the show and talking about the history of their respective franchises. For Neema, he's been a diehard Rockets fan his whole life, so we're going to get right into it. I'm actually a huge Hakeem Olajuwon fan, a pretty big Rockets fan, and Hakeem was actually the first ever episode of Big Fellas Basketball back in June of last year. So definitely I have a huge affinity for this team and for this organization, but no one I think that I've ever met matches your Rockets acumen. So let's take it all the way back. Talk to us a little bit about the early days of the Rockets and what that might have looked like for a team that didn't even start in Houston.
Yeah, so actually the Rockets didn't even start in Houston. They actually started in San Diego in 1967. So in the 1960s, there was a space race. And like, you know, whenever you think about like, oh, Houston Rockets, well, the Johnson Space Center was built in Houston. I mean, it's in Houston. I actually live really close to it. I used to go there all the time, pass by it all the time when I go to my aunt's house, like great place. And actually, Hakeem actually lives near there. He did. His house was his estate was right next to Johnson Space Center. Whenever you think about it, it's like, oh, the name and the city kind of go hand in hand. It's Space City, the Houston Rockets. But actually, in the 1960s, San Diego had a huge aerospace industry, and they were given a franchise in 1967. 1967, what happened in the 1960s? The space race, right? So San Diego was hugely involved in the space race. There was a lot of city pride for that. And so the city decided on the name of the Rockets. So we have the San Diego Rockets from 1967 to 1971. The craziest thing about the San Diego Rockets is honestly like the history of that team literally goes back to year one. We have a huge name, the very first pick from the San Diego Rockets. 7th overall in the 1967 draft. None other than the mobster himself, current Miami Heat GM, Pat Riley. So Pat Riley actually played for the San Diego Rockets for the first 3 seasons. He actually never played in Houston, but he was the first pick for that team. He was the first ever draft pick in Rockets history, not Houston Rockets history. But then the year after that, you know, we get Elvin Hayes, and Rick Adelman. Elvin Hayes actually went to the University of Houston. And then the year after that, 2 years after that, 2 big names in Houston Rockets history. One of them, the coach of the championship teams, and the other one, a Hall of Famer, one of the best point guards of all time, underrated point guard of all time, an analyst right now for AT&T Sportsnet in Houston. Calvin Murphy and Rudy Tomjanovich were both drafted in 1970-71. By the San Diego Rockets. But then in 1971, the Rockets got sold and they moved to Houston. It was their first year in Houston. And so through the last 2 years in San Diego, the Rockets went 57 and 97, which was not good. They didn't make the playoffs either year. And they were just like not performing well. Attendance was low. And so the owner was looking to sell the team. There was a huge investment bank happening in Houston in 1971. It was led by a real estate broker or investment group, and the team was bought for only $5.6 million, which is ridiculous to think about. That NBA team was valued at $5.6 million at one point. Whenever, you know, recently the Rockets got sold for over $2 billion. But the franchise was the first actual NBA team in Texas. We were the first Texan team in the NBA. And, you know, you go to the city where Johnson Space Center was built just 10 years before that. We had just won the space race, and you know, a year or two later, Houston's NASA's booming, and Rockets made sense. So now you're in Houston.
Thank you for setting up all that amazing context, because even for people that really follow the league, it's so hard to really know such awesome information about a franchise that maybe a lot of us know and love, but it's so hard to really know those minute details that make the Rockets who they are. And even after that, it's things still kind of get a little murky, because maybe a lot of our listeners might know about Hakeem Olajuwon in the 80s, 90s, 2000s Rockets, and we'll definitely get into those. But in the 70s, right, they had one of the greatest players in all time, in Moses Malone, for a few years, made it to the finals in '81. And people maybe don't even know that, let alone remember just everything that went on there. Maybe if you could talk a little about those pre-Hakeem Rockets days, and it really just sets up the context for the franchise that Hakeem Olajuwon walked into.
Yeah, so we'll fast forward a couple of years. Calvin Murphy was on the team. Rudy Tomjanovich was on the team. Calvin Murphy played his entire career in Houston up until 82, 83. He was a 20 to 25. I think at his max, he was about 25.6 points per game, around four. He used to average about 7 assists per game before that. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best players in Rockets history. And then on top of that, you have Rudy Tomjanovich, very well known for getting punched in the jaw by Kermit Washington. John Lucas, who's not to be confused with the other John Lucas or the other John Lucas, who all played for the Rockets. So in 1976, 1977, the Rockets draft John Lucas, who's now the assistant coach of the Rockets, and we can talk about him once we get a little bit more into the modern day, because I really love the work he does. And his son actually played for the Rockets later on down the road too. And that year, the Rockets actually finished first in their division. They were 49-33. And this was back whenever the NBA was only 4 divisions, and the Rockets were in the Eastern Conference. So they were the second best team in the East. And they actually made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, losing to Philly, who ended up losing to Portland, the Bill Walton Portland team, in the NBA Finals. After that, they struggled for a year or two. They had Moses Malone on those teams, but I think in 1977, 78, he was hurt for a bit. And it wasn't until, I believe, 1980, 81 that the team actually performed really well. What's crazy about that, we made the NBA Finals, right? We made the NBA Finals with a record of 40-42. That's, unheard of. I mean, a team under 500 making the NBA Finals. And, even whenever you go to the Hakeem years, the 1995 Finals, we were a 6 seed. So the Rockets have a history of being underdogs. Houston has a history of being underdogs. There's a slogan in Houston. It's Houston versus everybody. Everybody versus you. Sorry, John, but versus everybody. And so it's kind of that mentality that we have back in Houston. And maybe it stems from the sports teams, or maybe the sports teams just emulate that. And it happened again in 1994, and we'll talk about that once we get to Hakeem. So we make the finals in 80. Or sorry, we make the finals in 81. 1982, the team kind of stays together. We lose in the first round to Seattle. And then 1992, 1993, that's when Moses Malone left. And I believe he went to Philly. And so the Rockets had a horrible record after that. We were 14-68 in 1983. The year after that, we were 29-53. So we actually had a better record. 1983, we get Ralph Sampson. So Ralph Sampson is a huge name in Rockets history. For people that don't know, Ralph Sampson was 7'4". He played for 4 different teams throughout his career: Houston, Golden State, Sacramento, Washington. But his time in Houston, he was incredible. His first 2 seasons, he was 21-11 and 22-10. Ralph Sampson was a tall dude who could really play basketball really well. He's a huge name in Houston. And Houston as a city, we're also with the Rockets specifically. Like you said, with Hakeem, with Yao Ming, even later on down the line, we had Dwight Howard as well. Ralph Sampson and Moses Malone, Elvin Hayes. Ralph Sampson's one of those guys as well. It's a city of big men. He was just a really tall, really skinny big man. But then 1984, the first year of the lottery, balls bounced the right way, and the Houston Rockets land Hakeem Olajuwon.
Thank you so much, Neema, for giving us that much needed context, because even someone like me, who right now I'm happy I can jump into the conversation because I know a little bit about Hakeem and that late big three, the Yao Ming Rockets. Like, I know about that, but a lot of our listeners, me included, have no idea what happened back in the 70s and 80s. So great thinking about that. And if you want to study some basketball history, I think this is the perfect episode for you, especially when it comes to the Rockets. So it's great thinking about all that. I'm super curious on draft day, right? You said the paintball ball is bounced the right way. Michael Jordan was also in that draft class, which is super interesting, but no one in Houston's complaining because, of course, Hakeem Olajuwon's one of the greatest big men of all time. And if in episode 1 of Big Fellas Basketball, I make the case for why he's the greatest big man of all time. We'll get into all of that and all that good stuff. But on draft day, I mean, I want to know what you think, because I think it's so interesting to think about the probably the biggest what if in NBA history is if the Rockets accept the trade that would have sent Clyde Drexler and the number 2 overall pick that ended up being Sam Bowie to the Houston Rockets, who would have, for Ralph Sampson, the Rockets would have had the number 1 and number 2 picks in that draft, which would have gotten them, along with Clyde Drexler, which would have gotten them Hakeem, Michael Jordan, and Clyde Drexler all on the same team. Contracts get all wacky a few years down the line. There's only one basketball, but I don't know, man. That would have been crazy.
Yeah, let's start with that big what if, right? So Clyde Drexler was going into his second year of the NBA. He was also a rookie. And Clyde Drexler was the 14th overall pick that year. Ralph Sampson the year before that was the 1st overall pick. So you think about it, like realistically, number 14 overall pick, second year player, and the number 2 pick in the draft for the guy who was drafted number 1 beforehand. And like he just put up 20 and 11, right? So he's panning out. Clyde Drexler, his rookie season, only averaged 7 points per game. And I think the hope there, and like realistically, you think about it, and you're like a guy averaging 7 points per game, or a guy already averaging 20 and 11 his rookie season, and he's 7'4". Like, I'm not trading that, right? I don't care who's at number 2. But I think the hope there for Portland was that there was the connection with Clyde Drexler, right? I mean, Clyde Drexler, he went to high school in Houston. He played college in Houston. He came back and played in Houston. I mean, he got traded, but he remained in Houston. He still lives there. He's a commentator there now. And so, like, I think the hope there was like, oh, they have that attraction to Clyde. They know the kind of player he is. They've seen him kind of grow firsthand. But the Rockets were adamant on having this Twin Towers lineup. Hakeem Olajuwon, Ralph Sampson, both of them over 7 feet tall. Hakeem's really like 6'11", but at the time, people lie. So both of them over like 7 feet tall. Both of them, incredible big men. Both of them number 1 overall picks. You don't pass that up, especially in a league that is not the modern NBA, where you can run 2 bigs, right? The whole game is basically playing above other people at that point. And so the whole point of let's go into the what if and say, okay, well, what happens now? Let's say you trade Ralph Sampson, you get Michael Jordan, and you get Clyde Drexler. Clyde Drexler played the 3 a lot in Houston. You're fine with him playing the 3 in Houston then too, right? So then you play Michael Jordan at the 2, you play Hakeem at the 5. No, the 4 was Ralph Sampson. You could probably play Robert Reed at the 4. I actually met Robert Reed when I was a little kid at the All-Star break.
That's sick.
I think it was like the 2004 All-Star break. I have a story about that whenever we get to it, because Houston has hosted 2 All-Stars, and both of them have been very eventful for me. But Robert Reed, like, he was like 6'8", and at the time, that's a 3 or 2. Not really much of a 4, but they had other big men on the roster. And then like the point guard was, the point guard wouldn't have mattered because like the whole trade was a big man for 2 wings. They had the point guard figured out with John Lucas. And like Lionel Hollins also was on that team, which is, just another big name. I don't think that like, there's only one ball thing works out. Imagine a team with Michael and Hakeem. And like, don't even talk about the whole Clyde Drexler part of it. Like, Clyde wasn't Clyde until a couple of years later. But then once you have, like, let's say 1988, Hakeem hitting, Michael Jordan hitting, Clyde hitting, and I mean, the Twin Towers lineup worked, right? I mean, like, we made it to the finals the year after. Like, 2 years, Hakeem's second year, we made it to the finals. We got beat by a Boston team that had Larry Bird, Rick Carlisle, the Boston team that everybody thinks about. And we actually beat the Lakers that year going to the playoffs. Like, we beat a Lakers team with Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, nobody
in 5 games.
In 5 games, with a second-year Hakeem. Like Hakeem in his second year did very well against Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in that series. He put up in each game. In game 3, he put up 40. In game 3, he put up 40. In game 4, he put up 35. And in game 5, he put up 30. And they only won that game by 2. I mean, like, Hakeem did his job against a guy who we say is some people will say most people will say is the number 1 center of all time. And Hakeem did it in his second year. Although I will say, Kareem was obviously at the end of his career. So
I'm going to jump on that, though. One of my biggest arguments, Kareem won Finals MVP the year before. Now, it was because of some late Finals heroics in that series in '85 against the Celtics. But no matter what, like, he wasn't completely washed.
Yeah, he wasn't a scrub.
Did a great job.
He wasn't a scrub at any point in his career.
At no point, or else he wouldn't have played another 4 years after that. But what I really want to talk about, though, because I think it's so interesting, is how that Rockets team, that Twin Tower lineup was so dominant. Everyone kind of forgets that if you really asked anybody after the '86 season, who's going to be the team of the decade and finish the decade off with more fun, who's going to win the '87, '88, '89, who's going to be the dominant team this decade? No one's saying the Lakers. Everyone's picking the Celtics or the Rockets, right? Is picking one of those 2 teams. And those 2 teams never won again. And the reasons being, right, we'll get into it. For the Celtics, that Len Bias unfortunately passed away 2 days after being drafted, leading to all those players in the Celtics taking more minutes and things that, Larry's Bird back couldn't handle it. But then with the Rockets, you have cocaine and you have Ralph Sampson's feet being in the worst shape possible, both with the feet and with the cocaine addiction. Just really both the worst cases of either one in NBA history. So let's talk about it. How dominant would that Rockets team have been, right? The year coming back the year after in '87, with the Lakers getting older, with the Celtics in the position they were, if they hold up and if cocaine isn't an issue and if Ralph Sampson's feet aren't made of glass.
Yeah, Ralph Sampson played 43 games that season. So, and he did play in the playoffs, but he obviously was dealing with the fact that, like, you're dealing with that injury. Hakeem went off in that series. If you go look at that game 6 against Seattle, like whenever you told me we were doing this, I just wanted to read up a little bit on like everything, and I looked at the stat line and I was like 49 and 25 in a game 6 that you lost. Like how I would be pissed. I would be so mad. I would be beyond mad if I were Hakeem right there. And, what's crazy is the year after, we actually ended up shipping out Ralph Sampson. We sent him to Golden State. And, after that, everything was kind of downhill. The fact that he was a Hall of Famer is kind of, like, wild, just because, like, he only really had, like, 3 or 4 healthy seasons in the league. But that just shows, like, how good Ralph Sampson was when he was playing. Like, the man made the Hall of Fame with 4 healthy seasons. Even Yao Ming had to have reasons. But, like, hey, Hakeem did his thing in those series, man. It took a long time for the team to really, like, figure things out. I mean, the year after that, we were 46 and 36 again, losing in the first round. Year after that, lose in the first round. Year after that, you lose in the first round. Like, how many times do you have to lose in the first round over and over before, like, you finally are like, all right, like, let's buy in. And so that's what kind of became a problem in the 90s. And that's what actually led to them building the championship team a little bit.
So that it's actually raises a super interesting point, because a lot of people that I know about Hakeem and wanting to trade in 91, 92, he was putting up great seasons statistically, but the team wasn't winning. The culture wasn't the right thing. There was a bunch of stuff about the organization assuming he faked injuries when he claimed he didn't. He's a huge man, honors everything to him. I've heard Kenny Smith and all these guys talk about, there's no one on this planet that I know of that's more honorable than Hakeem that would never do something like that. So he took it personally. That strained the relationship, but it's crazy how that strained the relationship actually ended up in a championship a year or two later. And whether it's 94, 95, they made it work. I mean, you know better than I do. I mean, what do you think is the biggest reason as to why that happened? I mean, is it mostly their roster? Is it Hakeem? Like, what's really the driving force?
It was Rudy Tomjanovich.
There we go. Okay.
It was Rudy Tomjanovich. So Don Chaney was the coach before Rudy T, and Don Chaney wasn't bad. We had like winning seasons every year under him. 91, 92, we were struggling. It's Hakeem's 7th year. And if you look at that roster, like really go and look at that roster, it's almost the same roster as the one we won a championship with for the most part. I mean, we had Hakeem Olajuwon, we had Otis Thorpe, we had Vernon Maxwell, we had Kenny Smith, we had Matt Bullard, we had Avery Johnson, we had Carl Herrera, who was a like kind of a hometown favorite. He played in Houston. Anybody who went on Clutch Fans at any point in their life, which is like a Houston blog site, there's a guy on there who's named after him and pretends to be an insider. But like we had a good team. And Rudy T comes in, he finishes his season 16-14. And then the year after that, we're 55-27. We beat the Clippers in the first round, and we take Seattle to 7. And remember, this is a Seattle team with Sean Kemp, Gary Payton, all of them. And so I might have the year wrong, but in like before the championship, basically what happened was, and we learned about like there's a story that kind of came out or resurfaced, maybe it might not have came out, but whenever the whole Harden fiasco happened over the offseason this year because he was angry with the front office. So it was a little bit of a wishful thinking from Rockets fans of Hakeem went through the same thing, basically telling ownership, like, I want out, I don't want to be here. And it was over money, but it was also over the fact that we're losing and you're not paying me well enough. We're not winning games the way we should be. And they gave him a big deal. Robert Horry in his second season really stepped up. I mean, that's another guy we drafted. Sam Cassell was a rookie that year, and he was huge for our championship teams. Everybody in Houston is a big Sam Cassell fan. And so things really just kind of worked out at the right time. That first year, we beat Portland in the first round. We beat Phoenix in the second round. And what's crazy about Phoenix, right? So in that second series versus Phoenix, and this is actually like, it's a really cool story because it gives a little bit of history about everybody knows those teams as the Clutch City teams. And that's where Houston really got its moniker of being Clutch City. Those first two games against Phoenix, Rockets lost by 4 points and 7 points. And there's a huge article with the front saying Choke City. And the players took, the Michael Jordan meme, like, I took that personally. They took it Mario, like, all of the Michael Jordan meme where they say, like, I took that personally. They took that personally. They wrote Choke City on their shoes. And like they went out and they beat the Suns by 16. They beat them by 11 the game after that. They beat them by 23 the game after that. Phoenix ends up taking game 6. And in game 7, Hakeem goes off for 37 and 17. I think it was by the end of game 5, they were talking about like the Choke City thing. And I was like, it's not Choke City. And Leslie Alexander, the former owner, he said, it's not Choke City, it's Clutch City. And then a company starts up Clutch City Entertainment. They named the mascot Clutch, and Houston becomes Clutch City. And honestly, it's a nickname that it's stuck all the time. Whether or not it's held true for the franchise, really, then late, it hasn't really. But it's that mentality, and it stems really from these championship teams. I mean, the influence, honestly, that the 94 and 95 Rockets have in the city of Houston it's like emotional. Like if I was a little bit less sober, I'd probably be you might be able to get some tears out of my eyes. It really is like an emotional, like it's a connection that people have, especially if you're a fan of the team, and also from the city, because you really see how that team is really embodied in the people of the city and the mindset of the city, the culture of the city as well, and it stems from these teams. It really does.
So in mentioning Clutch City, right, it obviously puts a premium on those championships and saying, okay, wow, like they winning a championship as a 6th seed, right, going through all that adversity, that's a huge thing. And you would think those championships would carry a lot of merit. Unfortunately, not every NBA fan is that educated in knowing that, and they just say, okay, Jordan wasn't in the league. Those are free championships. I see you shaking your head, right? You're probably boiling with rage right now. I'm going to try to hopefully contain yourself, maybe. This kids listen to this show. But that being said, I really want to know what your thoughts are on that, and how you would defend that to someone that just looked at you and said, well, Jordan was playing baseball. Because there's a lot of reasons to point out as to why that wouldn't have made a difference. Right.
So Jordan won the three-peat 91 and 93 and 96 to 98. So could the Bulls would the Bulls have beat the Rockets 96 to 98? Sure. I'll give people that. 91 to 93.
Oh man.
91 to 93. The Rockets won 5 out of the 6 matchups. Actually, in 93 to 95, the 2 years that Michael wasn't there, the Rockets were 2-2 against them. And you put Michael, but the thing is, you put Michael on those teams, they still didn't have an answer for Hakeem Olajuwon. Michael Jordan himself has said, we didn't want to see Houston because we didn't have an answer for Hakeem. everybody in the league at the time knew that if the Rockets and the Bulls met up in the finals, they had no answer for Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, did the Rockets have an answer for Michael Jordan? Nobody in the league did. But what the Rockets did have was they had a bunch of elite wing defenders that you can just toss at Hakeem, you can just toss at Michael over and over and over and over and over and over again. Eventually, something's going to stick. Eventually, one game it's going to work. The difference between that, though, is, you're able to lock him up maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then he figures out how to beat the guy. And then you switch it over, and it's 1 or 2 minutes, figures out how to beat the guy. They had 0 people who could hold Hakeem for 30 seconds. Like, Hakeem would have dominated the Bulls. We would have seen an insane stat line of, oh my God, this guy averaged 40, 20, and 8 in a playoffs. And it's not 8 assists, it's 8 blocks a game, like the fact that people say that the 94, 95 rings are not real because Michael didn't play. Mind you, he did play in 95, and I don't care about the fact that he only had 17 games or whatever, and he was wearing number 45 and not number 23. It's still Michael Jordan, and he was still playing professional sports. And do you want me to believe that this man wasn't just playing basketball in his free time? He was just like, I'm going to completely retire. I'm not going to touch the ball for 2 years. Come on now. Michael Jordan could be playing pickup at 24-hour fitness in 1994 and 1995, and just doing that and come into an NBA game and destroy everybody in the league. It had nothing to do with the fact that Michael was worse or better than Hakeem. It was the fact that he, being on those Bulls teams, was not enough for them to beat the Rockets. Also, if we want to talk about whether or not Hakeem or like the kind of just backtracking a little bit, but with that draft, and not 84 draft, there are 0 regrets in the city of Houston about taking Hakeem over Michael Jordan. There's more regrets about not making that trade, I'm sure, but there's 0 regrets about Hakeem. You'll find people in Houston, not myself, because like I understand the fact that Michael Jordan was one of the best players of all time. You'll find people in Houston though that will be adamant on the fact that like, nope, like Hakeem is better because Hakeem was Hakeem. And the thing is like, Michael was Michael. No, nobody can really surpass Michael, but we've seen guys be like Michael, right? Like we saw Kobe Bryant basically emulate him to a just as good, a little bit worse level, right? Kawhi Leonard is a Kobe Bryant clone as well. So that's a Michael Jordan clone. LeBron doing the same thing. You can't show me one guy in the league who's been able to do what Hakeem did whatsoever. And if you put Hakeem in the modern NBA, this dude could already hit threes. And he never practiced them or never shot them. Like he could hit them every once in a while. If he was practicing threes, it's over, man. Like this dude, he's top in blocks. He's in the top in the steals. One of the best rebounders of all time. One of the best all-around defenders of all time. He's one of the best players of all time. And the thing is like nobody can be Michael, but people can be like Michael. I mean, there's a movie about it. But nobody can be like Hakeem, and nobody can be Hakeem. Michael's the better player, obviously. But Hakeem's a one of a kind, and I don't think anybody will ever be able to emulate the kind of player he was. The closest thing we have right now is offensively maybe Jokic. Jokic is a better passer. He's got that post presence, and then Embiid, obviously, he'll say it himself. He tries to emulate Hakeem a lot, and he has it a little bit in him, but like it's not Hakeem Olajuwon. Neither of them are or ever will be Hakeem Olajuwon.
There's so much to unpack there, whether it's his all-time stuff that we're going to get into at the end. But really what I want to jump on is I have some more firepower if you need it for defending those rings. The Bulls didn't just lose to anybody for the Rockets win that championship. They lost to the Orlando Magic, and the sole reason, which is covered in Last Dance documentary, is because the Magic had Shaq, or let's just say a dominant big man, and the Bulls didn't. So those Bulls lost in 6 to that Magic team because of the size, and they didn't have Dennis Rodman at the time.
Who did they lose to in 94? The New York Knicks. Yeah. So in 94, they lost to the Knicks, who had Patrick Ewing, who they couldn't hold, and Hakeem destroyed Patrick Ewing. And then in 95 they lose to the Magic, who had Shaq, who they couldn't hold. And the
Rockets swept them.
Destroyed Shaq.
I think swept's the better word than destroyed. Destroyed sounds like Shaq still did something. Swept, right? Not even a thought in that series.
Yeah, and actually that series, before we move on from the championship teams, do you know about the Nick Anderson thing?
Oh, the free throws, of course, everyone knows
Free
about
throws,
that.
yeah. So the free throws in there, it's majestic. It makes it so much fun. But like, no offense to Nick Anderson or what he did as a player, or the fact that, you know, his career kind of fell after that. But like, that was insane. Like the fact that happened, and also the fact that, you know, Rockets won that championship as the 6th seed. We went through like this, in my opinion.
Of course, never having home court
even,
advantage.
Even above, like, I know LeBron wants to say that he won the hardest championship of all time for like 2017, right? Was that the year?
2016, 3-1. Yep.
I get them all mixed up. We got beat by the Warriors every single time, so it doesn't fucking matter. But like LeBron says that he won the hardest ring in 2016 for beating the 73-9 Warriors, coming back 3-1. Which, like, yes, you had one of the best finals of all time. Was it one of the hardest trips of all time? I mean, the Rockets beat a 60-22 Utah Jazz, who the year before lost in the the year after. So they lost. So in the first round, they play the Utah Jazz, who in 1994 made the Western Conference Finals, and in 1996 made the Western Conference Finals. So you're playing a team that both other years, front and back, was a Western Conference Finals team in the first round, and you beat them. Then it's the Sun series, and that's with the kiss of death. That one goes to 7, and the Suns were the 2 seed, and the Suns themselves were, you know, 59-23, Charles Barkley, like they weren't nobodies. And some people want to say that David Robinson is a better center than Hakeem Olajuwon. Not true, and it was never true at any point when they matched up. We played the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals. We beat them in 6, and Hakeem has his way with David Robinson. Takes him to church, takes him to dinner, takes him on a picnic after. He does whatever he can to David Robinson. He averaged 35, 13, and 4 in that series. David Robinson averaged 24 and 11. Hakeem Olajuwon, in my opinion, the best big man of all time. I agree with you. He's the best big man of all time.
We're going to go into a little bit further, but before we do that, we do have to address some of the negatives, right? That we here on Gen Z Hoops, we're not just going to talk about the positives and just completely forget about the things that hurt our arguments. So we're going to talk about them now. Is the failed big 3 in Houston, 96, 97, 98, 99. The years where, like we said, they wouldn't have beat the Bulls, and people might point to those. But we're aware that those years, the Bulls and Dennis Rodman, their teams are completely different. Stuff's gonna happen. Like it's not really the same situation there. But that year, right, the Rockets were favored because they had Scottie. They ended up getting Scottie Pippen in '99. They had Charles Barkley later on, right in the middle of that. What ended up happening there to those Rockets teams, and why do you think they weren't able to click the way everyone thought they would?
Let's start with 96, 97, right? So that's when Charles Barkley joins the Rockets. He makes the All-Star team that year. He averages 19 points per game. Clyde Drexler's on that team, and Hakeem Olajuwon's on that team. Charles Barkley's 33. You don't have Vernon Maxwell on the squad anymore. You don't have Kenny Smith on the squad anymore. You don't have Sam Cassell. No more Robert Horry. The clutch city team's not there anymore. And so Charles Barkley missed like 30 games. Clyde Drexler missed like 20 games. And we still finished, you know, we made to the Western Conference Finals. It's not like we were nobodies, you know. We made to Western Conference Finals. We take the Jazz to 6 games. And that's whenever the Jazz lost to the Bulls in 6 in 97. And they did it again in 98. And so in 1998, we played the Jazz in the first round. You play a team that goes all the way to finals. But we were 41-41 that year. Again, not good. Hakeem missed a lot of time that season. Barkley also missed a good amount of time, and so did Clyde Drexler. So these 3 guys, they're going towards the end of their career. The good thing about this year, in my opinion, is it's you start seeing some of the newer guys, right? So Cuttino Mobley, who's one of my favorite Rockets of all time. This is his rookie season. Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen comes to the Rockets after his Bulls tenure, the Big 3, or they do the 3-peat. They have their fun. We all watched The Last Dance. We all saw how that went. This is the lockout year too. So 31, there's 50 games. Rockets go 31-19. Again, not bad. Scottie averages 15 points per game. Plays every game. Averages 15 points per game. Wasn't the player he was supposed to be. He kind of half-assed it his whole time. And then same thing with like Charles Barkley. Like towards the end, he just like didn't want to be in Houston anymore. He hates Houston now. Apparently, he still wants Leslie Alexander to cut him a check. Apparently, we owe him money. Uh, and so until he gets that money, he's going to keep bashing Houston. But, that year just didn't work out. And after that season, we get rid of Scottie Pippen. Team stays around for one more year, and that was the rookie season of Steve Francis. Charles Barkley still there for that year, and that was also year 2 of Kelvin Cato, who was arguably one of the worst picks the Rockets have ever made. But it's like it was a little bit of just kind of like bad drafting. Everybody left. You are getting guys who are like 38, 35, 36 years old, past their prime, and just not playing well. And so it kind of became time to move on. Like, would it have been nice for Hakeem to retire a Rocket? I think everybody wishes that. Anytime I see a picture of him in a Raptors jersey, I feel a little uncomfortable. But it was time to move on. And the early 2000s Rockets were a lot of fun. So. But I'll backtrack a little bit to we'll start with Steve Francis and Cuttino Mobley, because I really don't want to skip over them, because people don't realize honestly that those guys are also a big part of Houston. So Steve Francis, everybody knows he had a lot of problems. You talked about the cocaine issues with the Rockets beforehand. Steve Francis had a lot of substance abuse problems, and if nobody has read his uninterrupted article about his life, is very good. Really lays out the just all the stuff that happened for him growing up in DC, having to work corners as a kid, which is just like insane to me, but it happens all around the world. Coming to Houston, actually, for JUCO, going to San Jacinto Community College, which is one of the better community colleges in the United States. I think it's ranked like number 2 or number 3. But it's also down the road from me. My sister went there for a little bit. I took classes there when I was in high school. And he actually played basketball there. Eventually gets his college deal and goes to Maryland. Gets drafted by the Grizzlies, and basically straight up tells them, like, I'm not playing here. And so they trade him somewhere where he's comfortable. He goes to Houston. And man, that backcourt, Steve Francis and Cuttino Mobley, like those two guys. And I got to watch them once live. I was my first ever game. I got to watch them once live. But even to this day, man, like I love Cuttino Mobley. I love Steve Francis. He still lives in Houston. He actually runs I think it's called the Basketball League. He runs a team in Houston, the Houston Push. And so in 2002, 2003, this is the fun year. This is where we draft Yao Ming. And we also draft Boki Nakbar, who I got to interview a few weeks ago. Something cool that he told me was that, I guess not cool for him, but I guess cool for the fans, is that his rookie season, they basically straight up told him, hey, we don't have our first round pick next year. You're going to basically just sit, practice, watch the games, watch courtside, listen in. We'll play you every once in a while, but we're not focused on you this year. We're focused on Yao. Next year, you're our rookie. And so at the time, we had Rudy T. We still had him. And Boki Nakbar, he actually said that Rudy T was like, in my interview with him, he said he was like a father figure almost to him. Unfortunately, in 2003, 2004, before that season starts, we find out that Rudy T has cancer. And luckily he's still here with us today, but we find out he has cancer, and he steps down, and the Rockets need to replace him. In comes Jeff Van Gundy, who again everybody loves, but Jeff Van Gundy was a very, very winning coach, right? And so the Rockets were a young team. Year 2 with Yao Ming. This is actually also the first year of the current rebrand. The Rockets are all that. 2003, 2004 was the first year of that. It was their first year in the Toyota Center, and they actually made the playoffs that year. And they played the Big Four Lakers team that lost in the finals to the Pistons. And what people don't know is that series was way closer than it should have been. The Rockets lost game 1 by 1 point. And they lost game 4 by 4 points. They won game 3 by 11. They got blown out in game 5, and game 2 it kind of slipped towards the end. But it was a close series with a very, very good team. And they had that good team, and Jeff Van Gundy coming into year 2 going with year 3 of Yao Ming. You start feeling a little bit of like, okay, Steve Francis, like, what is he? What is he going to become? He's now in year 5. There's this guy in Orlando who is putting up 30 something points per game, who's on the trade block, and we can't pass that up. And so the Rockets pull the trigger. They trade Steve Francis over to Orlando, bring in Tracy McGrady and start that dynamic duo of Tracy and Yao Ming. And from there, everything kind of took off. You play the Mavs in the first round that year, goes to 7. That was a very good Mavericks team. 2005, 2006, we missed the playoffs, but Yao Ming didn't play 25 games. Tracy McGrady didn't play 35 games. And that's kind of the story of the era, right? The Rockets, Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady eras. You had 2 guys who, when they were playing, were unstoppable, but they stopped themselves because they couldn't play. Like they weren't playing, they weren't on the court enough. And man, those teams were fun. I mean, you had Rafer Alston on those teams. You had Luther Head on those teams. Chuck Hayes, John Lucas III was on one of them. Moochie Norris was on a couple of those. I think I already said Luther Head, but if I didn't say Luther Head. David Wesley, and then you move on to 06, 07, you get a little bit further in, you bring in Shane Battier. You go down another year, you bring in Aaron Brooks, bring in Luis Scola, who is a Hall of Famer, or going to be a Hall of Famer. You had Mutombo, you had Carl Landry, you had Bobby Jackson. These are fun teams, man. Like, they were really, really fun teams. And the best part of all of it, and I got the privilege, I guess, to be able to go to a few of these games, was the 22-game win streak in 2008. So that was absolutely incredible. It got snapped by Boston, and I think a few years ago, the Rockets had a really long win streak. I think it was like 16, 17 games, and that also got snapped by Boston. We also lost to the finals in Boston. And so it's kind of
both times, 81 and 86.
Yeah, both times. And so it's just like, it's kind of the way things go in Houston. But that 22-game win streak, man, and there was heart. There was a lot of heart for those teams, even though they didn't make the play, or they made the playoffs in 2008. They lost in the first round. But 2008, 2009, and this is the year that I want to talk about. 2008, 2009, who won the NBA Finals?
That would be the Los Angeles Lakers.
The Los Angeles Lakers with Kobe Bryant, Paul Gasol,
Lamar
Andrew
Odom.
Bynum, Lamar Odom. Rockets in round 1 go up against the Portland Trailblazers. Now, remember the Portland Trailblazers that year, it was Brandon Roy, LaMarcus Aldridge, Greg Oden, they had Nick Batum, Joel Prisbilla, Rudy Fernandez, Steve Blake. This is a good team. They were 54 and 28. Rockets were 53 and 29. So it was a very good matchup. Rockets win that series in 6, pretty handily. I mean, Ron Artest, now Metta World Peace, has a great series. Yao Ming has a good series. Aaron Brooks dropped 27 in game 1. We did it pretty well. I mean, Portland won 1 game by 4. And then they won another game by 11. The Rockets were able to get by them pretty fine, going up against the championship Los Angeles Lakers. And this is something that I'm very, very, very adamant on. if, and it's a big if, because whenever you're talking about the Houston Rockets of this era, it's hard to not have the big if question of health, right? If the Rockets have Yao Ming and have Tracy McGrady for that series. Now, Yao Ming was there for games 1 through 3. He gets hurt in game 3. If they have both of them for that series, or just Yao Ming for all 7 games, the Rockets beat the Lakers in the second round. I'm fully confident in that. So in game 1, the Rockets win. Kobe drops 32. Game 2, Kobe drops 40 and they win. Game 3, Lakers win. Game 4, I got the privilege to go to this game. By far, you asked where was I when the Tracy McGrady thing happened? That is not my favorite memory in Rockets history. My favorite personal memory is going to Rockets-Lakers game 4. Rockets won this game. I mean, they tied the series 2-2. It was a pivotal moment in the series. And the play I remember the most, and this is why Aaron Brooks, the short king, he was 5'9", It was wild. Like I met him once when I was in like middle school at the mall near my house. And like in middle school, I was like 5'5", 5'6". And I like looked at him and I was like, this dude's not much taller than I am. And I was like, and I watched him drop 34 in a playoff game. Like it was wild to me because I think it's the end of third quarter. And if you haven't seen it, go look it up. It's a very fun play. There's like 0.7 seconds left on the clock. They pass the ball, or like the inbounder was Ron Artest. As soon as he gets the ball, he tosses it up towards the rim. And you just see this tiny dude flying up in the sky, gets it and drops it in like perfect timing. A guy 5'10" catching an alley-oop off an inbounds play in the playoffs. In the playoffs, come on. That was by far one of my favorite memories. And what's funny is because right after that happened, like the Rockets were up big. Like they outscored the Lakers by 11 in that quarter. So I think it was sort of like getting a little cocky. Like we were up 29 at the end of that. The Lakers went on a huge tear in the fourth quarter. And I honestly think that was a little bit of a detriment to us because like game 5, they come out and they smack us. But then game 6, you know, we come back and we beat them by 15. We beat them pretty handily and kind of get our footing back. Luis Scola and Aaron Brooks do their job. Aaron Brooks was most improved player the year after that too. So that was kind of his coming out party was in that Lakers series. Man, those teams were fun. Those teams are really fun. The Rockets right now are kind of like moving away from using like the clutch city people in terms of media. And I really want them to start incorporating some of those like the Yao Ming T-Mac era guys. Like get Chuck Hayes to be an analyst or bring Aaron Brooks back or something and get Luis Scola to retire. That dude's still playing basketball, which is insane to me.
I mean, me included, right? You think about Hakeem, you think about the current Rockets with James Harden, you think about Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady, of course. But there's so many guys you just mentioned that I'm gonna have to look up after this to really make sure I'm caught up and know who these guys are and exactly what they do because I remember glimpses of them, but I really want to get further into Rockets histories, and I encourage listeners to do the same. One thing I want to bring up to make sure our listeners are aware is Ron Artest actually went to the Lakers the year following that, but he was on the Rockets that year when he threw that inbounds pass. And I know there's a story about him going to the locker room afterwards and talking to Kobe and saying, I want to win with you. I want to do that. And he helped them do that, obviously, in the 2010 season. But really cool thinking about that kind of dynamic there. Let's fast forward a little bit, though, to the Harden trade to the Rockets, all the things that brought with it. There's just a lot of things that happened in the years that followed that were huge in Rockets history. You being maybe in middle school, high school, when the trade goes down, what was going, what was the vibe in the city? Like, what were people thinking?
So the years prior to that, I mean, the Rockets were like constant 9 seed. We always had the 14th pick in the draft. We finished right above 500. And when you talk about the Meta World Peace going to Lakers thing, it's cool because Trevor Ariza actually left the Lakers and came to Houston. So it was like a little swap, which honestly was fine. Ariza had a little bit of loyalty, came back later, and was a big part of those Harden teams. And so we had Kyle Lowry, we had Goran Dragic, we had Aaron Brooks on there, obviously. Still, Carl Landry was on those teams. Luis Scola, Kevin Martin, who was a really good, scorer for those Rockets teams. Shane Battier was on there for a little bit longer. Random guys like Joey Dorsey were on those teams. Garrett Temple, Courtney Lee, Mike, not the same Mike Harris who just, or no, it's Mike Jones. Sorry, never mind. Damari Carroll was signed for our training camp that year. We had Ish Smith on that team, Patrick Patterson, Hashim Thabit was in Houston for a little bit, which I thought was a little bit funny because, big man city and you bring one of the biggest big man bust in the league, but he was, 7'3". I think it was also in his second season in the NBA too. It was just such a quick give up for the number 2 pick in the draft. Come 2012, 2013 offseason, the Rockets had a little bit of a log jam at the point guard. It's actually kind of funny because we got rid of all of them. But we had Lowry, we had Dragic, we had Aaron Brooks. Harden was on the market. And so the Rockets shipped Kyle Lowry over to Toronto for a first-round pick, and then flipped the first-rounder with Kevin Martin and then just a bunch of other pieces and another first-round pick. And they get James Harden. I think it was Cole Aldridge, Daquan Cook. There was another random name in there that I'm blanking on. And then to replace Lowry, because Dragic left for Phoenix as well, to replace Lowry, they go and they sign Jeremy Lin. And, a couple years after Yao retiring, Lin right after the Linsanity thing, it's sort of like a match made in marketing heaven, right? Immediately we make the playoffs again. And this is sort of why Houston fans, even now, like myself, I was very upset with the way Harden left, but I'll stick up for him still because this man really is a winner. I know people who don't want to believe it, don't want to think it, but he really is a winner. When the trade happened, and it was like late at night, and it was like towards the end of the end of the off season too. Like it was like a week before the season started, so nobody was really expecting this to sort of go down. But like we really thought it was just going to be like, oh, it's the Linsanity show's happening. We'll probably make something happen, but I think it was like 11 p.m. or something like that. I get like a notification. It's like James Harden trade to Houston. I remember I woke up my dad and I was like, James Harden's in Houston. He was like, who? And I was like, the bearded guy from Oklahoma City. He was like, oh, and I was like, yeah, like so exciting. And I was so super excited. And that's really where like everything in Rockets history takes off. Or not Rockets history, but the modern Rockets really takes off like this century. Because we were always sort of winning teams. I mean, I think over the last 20 years, the Rockets are the second or third most winning team in the NBA, which is very impressive. But like we didn't have the success in those previous years that we did in the Harden era. And that 2020 that 2012-2013 season, yeah, Jeremy Lin, James Harden, Chandler Parsons, that was such a fun trio. They used to have a little handshake where they would bow to each other. I used to have that as my screensaver on my old computer. I remember like we found my old computer during quarantine. And I like went, it was my screensaver still. I was like, oh, that's funny. Omer Asik was the center. We had Moti Yunus, Terrence Jones, Francisco Garcia, who was a lot of fun. Carlos Delfino, who dunked on Kevin Durant. And there's a very funny GIF of him laying down on the floor in the playoff series against OKC and like pretending to shoot himself because he was pissed at himself in the game. It was funny. But in the OKC series, we lose in 6. Like that was what it was, and we were the 8th seed under Kevin McHale. And then there's 2013-2014, which I know you brought it up earlier.
I'll take it from here. I have a memory of that too. We try to keep it professional here at Gen Z Hoops. I really don't want this to get too graphic for our younger audience. But everyone knows about Damian Lillard's shot against the Rockets. I was watching in my basement, and I told my father, who wasn't very into basketball, that Dad, like there's 0.9 seconds left, nothing can possibly happen. Right after Chandler Parsons hits that reverse layup to put them up 2, definitely just incomplete, but this was a shot going in. I was the lone Rockets fan being in New York in my 8th grade classroom. Absolutely got ripped on the next day. It was terrible. I was seeing posts on Instagram about the Rockets ownership on Wikipedia being changed to Damian Lillard, stuff like that. Just really disheartening stuff. You have a story though about just the action you took immediately following that shot going in, and our listeners, just so you know, it's a productive one. But what did you do to make sure that never happened again?
So I was 15 at the time, and like I was rehabbing, and that was at the time. Like at the time, I still wanted to play basketball in high school, and like I got the opportunity to the following year actually. So I guess it kind of worked, but I tore my rotator cuff and never played again really. I knew I wasn't going to go like D1 or anything, but obviously emotions run high, and whenever you're 15 and you're a diehard fan, things happen. And so James Harden refuses to switch. Chandler Parsons can't run, across the entire court. Damian Lillard somehow catches, sets, and releases in 0.9 seconds. Actually, a guy on Rockets Twitter, shout out Abel, posted a screenshot of that because it got brought up again because it gets brought up it gets brought up like once every couple months. There's actually a picture of Dame already has the ball in his hands and the clock's still not running. So, it is what it is. But so that shot goes in. I turn off the TV. There's tears running down my face a little bit. And I go to my room, slam the door, lock the door, don't want to talk to anybody, go into my notes app on my phone, and I set up a whole training regimen for myself. Wake up at 6 a.m., wake up at do this at 7 a.m., do this at 8 a.m., do this at 9 a.m. And the whole point of it was just like, I guess thinking about it now, maybe there's a deeper thing of just you can't get beat like that in real life. Like, thank God it didn't happen to you and it happened to them, but you can't get beat like that in real life. And since then, I've honestly had a much better work ethic. But at the time it was like, I'm gonna fix the Rockets. If you're not gonna, I'm gonna do it. And so maybe there's still a little bit of that in me, but I know I can't do it as a player. Maybe one day in a front office. But you know, so we play the Blazers that year. The next year, 2014-15, we get to the Western Conference Finals. And this season is the season that I would say is really what proves James Harden as a great player, because he was only like 25, 26 years old that season. Dwight Howard was out for a good amount of the year, and he wasn't the Dwight Howard he was before. He was a lot more similar to the Dwight Howard he was in like Atlanta and Charlotte. And I mean, this dude was carrying a team of Trevor Ariza, Patrick Beverley, Moti Yunus, Terrence Jones, Corey Brewer, Jason Terry, Kostas Papanikolaou, your Greek guy, Tariq Black, like not very good players. I will give a shout out to Josh Smith and Corey Brewer and Jason Terry for being the headband gang that brought us back in that Clippers series. That was a very, very great series. Game 5, coming back from being down like 19 in the third quarter to win that game, and then just embarrassing the Clippers in Game 6 and Game 7. It was great, but like Harden really, like that year, like you can't, like, yes, sure. Did he win them Game 5? No, but he won them Game 6 and 7, and he kept them in. He won them that first series against the Mavs, and he played his heart out against the Warriors that year. 15-16 was the down year, right? So we go 41-41, and what's crazy is the year after is when Kevin Durant goes to Golden State, right? So there was a plan set for between Kevin Durant and James Harden for him to come to Houston after the 15-16 free agency, or after the 15-16 season. But because the Rockets finished 41-41, he was like, y'all aren't even that good. And the Warriors just beat me when I was down 3-1. And so he didn't even, I think we got like an interview, but he didn't even like really care about it. We fired Kevin McHale that year. We got JB Bickerstaff. And thankfully, I mean, no offense to JB Bickerstaff, he's kept his name as a head coach in the league, but we got Mike D'Antoni the year after. Much better upgrade. And I guess I'll plug real quick. If nobody follows me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter at FindingNeema23. I posted something recently about James Harden's assist, just tracking his assists over time. And you can see that as soon as Mike D'Antoni came in, he turned this man into an incredible point guard. And he started actually playing the point guard that season. They moved Patrick Beverley over the 2 guard, and that's when I think he had one of his better seasons. We lose to the Spurs in 6. Some people call that Game 6 a choke job. Some people say he was hungover. Some people say he had a concussion. It was a bad game. You know, everybody has a bad game. I don't excuse. There's no excuse for it. But to, you know, label a man a choker over this game and an 0 for 27 that wasn't even really his fault. It is what it is. I mean, it's not just him. It's a system. It's everything. I think Harden really gets a bad rap. And it's kind of funny to me that he leaves Houston, goes to Brooklyn, and he gets all this love again. It's something that happens a lot with Houston fans. And we might sound bitter every once in a while when we talk like that. But really, I mean, like if you listen to Brian Windhorst's like Hoops Collective today, they were talking about like an interview with Tillman Fertitta, and Tim McMahon's like, well, the Rockets have actually been really close in the losses, and Windhorst goes, yeah, really close, like scoffs at it. The Rockets have lost like 13 they've lost 18 games by single digits, 13 of them against playoff teams, and then 32 games by less than 15, and like 24 of them are against playoff teams. Like, we've dealt with a lot of injuries this year. We're the worst team in the league this year, but we're not the worst team in the league. Like, I will not admit it. We're losing to the Lakers, even without, you know, AD and LeBron James. That should still be a very good team if you're a championship team. We're losing them by 2, playing 2 guys who weren't in the league 2 weeks ago. Like, we're a good team. We're not a great team. We're not a playoff team, but we're fine. And the future is bright in Houston. The Rockets-Warriors rivalry, you know, there's 2017-18. Chris Paul goes down in game 5. I think that if he doesn't go down in game 5, the Rockets win that series and win the finals. But, a lot of what ifs are in the Rockets history, as is with every single franchise. Every team has their what ifs. You go 0 for 27. Scott Foster and Tony Brothers, for some reason, are reffing game 7. And not to blame refs, but everybody across the board will say that those two guys are some of the, let's not say worst, but we'll say not inconsistent referees in the league. Even the commentators that game were saying, like, hey, like, are you guys going to call that stuff? And so the Rockets had their way in the first two series. They were the only team to take the Warriors past 5, the KD Warriors past 5 games, up until, the Raptors. But even then, like, those weren't the KD Warriors. He was out. And then Tillman Fertitta buys the team, and things started to change a little bit. There's a little bit more stress on financials, and Tillman's a very reactionary guy. And we kind of have seen that a lot over the course of the last few years. And so, Chris Paul has a down year. His contract's still really big. You say, I need to get off this contract and I need to do it whatever way possible. And overall, like over the last interviews, especially now that Morey's out of Houston, you can kind of see that he was pretty reluctant to get that deal done. Trading all those picks and Chris Paul away for Russell Westbrook, which at the time, if it would have led to a championship, it's always worth it, right? Any deal is worth it if it leads to a championship. But, Russ, that second half of the season, he was arguably the best player on the Rockets, gets hurt, gets COVID, quick turnaround, misses the training camp for the bubble, and they rest him in that Oklahoma City series. It goes 2-2. They have to rush him back, and by the time we get to the Lakers series, it's just like he's unhealthy. Harden is winded. We can't figure out a way to adjust. And just things don't work out. And so this offseason, obviously, and things changed. So
great stuff, Neema, talking about all this. A lot of things that maybe we've lived through, but not everyone knows everything about, because obviously there's so much Rockets history and there's so much going on in the league during that time. But thinking about maybe the outlook on the Rockets, obviously being record-wise the worst team in the league this year, they'll have a high draft pick this year at some point, right? You're hoping for that top 3. You're hoping for that top 3 pick. And a lot of that's going to be a big night for you. I'll be on the phone with you. But what are you really hopeful for coming out of this draft the next few years? What could Rockets fans be hopeful about?
Yeah, so a lot of people want to bash on Rafael Stone and the Rockets as a whole right now, just because, people didn't like the deals that were done, which I find funny because the deals that were made were the same deals being pushed by ESPN and pushed by Fox Sports. Like, so be mad at yourselves. I don't know. Russ wanted to leave because Harden basically told him, I'm out of here. Harden and Kevin Durant were working out, and KD basically said, you're coming to Brooklyn, like find a way for you to come to Brooklyn. Morey leaves, MDA leaves, and Harden doesn't really have a reason to stay in Houston anymore other than like loyalty to the franchise or loyalty to the city. But he doesn't have that trust in the front office anymore, right? Because his guys aren't there. The guys he had trust in aren't there anymore. The owner that he was playing under is no longer the same owner. And since his owner has came in, things have changed very rapidly. And that's not something that like star players want, especially whenever you're playing in the same area, right? Like change is fine if you're moving different teams. If you're staying in Houston, you don't want to have a brand new co-star next to you every season and just cycling out, co-stars until eventually something hits the wall. And that's kind of what the Rockets had been doing basically since the Dwight Howard days. I skipped over the fact that we had Ty Lawson for a random amount of time, and that didn't work out. And so people don't like the Harden deals. I think the one good thing that the Harden deals gave us is it gave us flexibility now. And if the flexibility now doesn't work, we have a lot of capital for the future. And so it's a lot of plan A, plan B. You can be mad that the Rockets didn't get Jared Allen or Karis LeVert. I can argue that the fact that Karis LeVert has played like 220 games over the course of 6 seasons. Like he's not been a healthy player for the majority of his career, even before the kidney issue. And then the Jared Allen stuff is, they wanted to test Wood at the center, and Oladipo was traded to Houston because Steven Silas saw potential in Oladipo because he was a former third-team All-NBA player. The good thing about Houston now is I think we have a very bright future. We might have a pick this year. If it's number 5, we're not getting it. But If it's number 1 through 4, we are getting it, and it's going to be locked into one of those 5 positions. I think it's 52% chance we get the pick, 48% chance we don't. So the odds are leaning a little bit in our favor, quite literally a little bit. But you hope you get one of those 4. You really hope you get number 1, right? You want Cade Cunningham. You want that franchise-changing guy. But we have really good youth, really good future, in my opinion. We talk about like the top level guys, right? Like Christian Wood, 25 years old, on a deal for 3 more years, really figuring out his game. If he can stay healthy next year, which has been a problem this year, I really think that he'll improve a lot more. He was a most improved candidate, still kind of is, just the missed games kind of messed that up. And Julius Randle having the season he did really like stops him from really being the guy for that award. But if he bulks up a little bit this offseason and really rehabs that ankle, I have very high hopes for him. Jayshawn Tate as well is a Rookie of the Year candidate, and he's been incredible as well. He's a very fun story too. He has a story out on The Ringer. If nobody has read it yet, definitely go read it. And then Kevin Porter Jr. and KJ Martin, who I could talk about for hours, but I don't want to make this a day-long podcast. But Kevin Porter Jr., in my opinion, if things work out for him mentally, which it seems like they have with John Lucas, the former Rocket and now assistant coach, who is just an amazing mentor, and he's a mental health advocate. He's gone through substance abuse problems himself, and so substance abuse, mental health problems, all this. You feel comfortable as someone who goes through that stuff, talking to someone who goes through that stuff, and so you feel even more comfortable when their profession is the same as yours, and especially when very few people have been in that thing, and so that relationship between him and between John Lucas and Kevin Porter Jr. is going to be very important moving forward. And KJ Martin, man, every game it's like he's a much better player. Every single game, he's so much more improved, and he reminds me a lot of Andre Iguodala, and I think he can be that kind of guy. He just needs to be he needs to improve his playmaking and his on-ball defense, but I really, really like him. And then we don't even talk about the other guys that the Rockets are picking up, like Kyrie Thomas. He's been really good since he got here. Cam Oliver had 17 points against Andre Drummond. Armani Brooks has become a lights-out shooter over the last few games. And so the future really, in my opinion, is bright in Houston. You throw Cade Cunningham in there, as well as the 2 other picks they have. They have Portland's pick and Milwaukee's pick this draft. You throw those guys in there, and you have the cap space to maybe go out and get another free agent. You bring back Kelly Olynyk, who's been huge for you so far. He's having the best season of his career, or at least the best stretch of his career, at least with Houston. I think there's a lot that can happen. There's talks today about how John Wall might get bought out, and how they're probably going to look to move Eric Gordon in the offseason, and I'm kind of okay with both of those. I like the youth movement that's happening in Houston. I love Steven Silas. The entire bench is basically compromised of player development coaches. Rafael Stone, even if you don't like the Brooklyn deal, let's wait. Let's chill out before we talk about that, because the Cavs got Kyrie Irving from a traded pick. Portland got Damian Lillard from a traded pick. Boston got like the Markelle Fultz pick from a traded pick. And with the big 3 in Brooklyn ending in 2023 and a lot of those picks coming after 2023, we'll see what happens in Brooklyn. Like, will they be able to recover? They weren't able to recover after they traded for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and it led to them losing out on guys like Dame. I'm not as low on the Rockets' future as many people are. I'm actually pretty high on it. I understand that there's ways that things can get derailed. Kevin Porter Jr. might not be the guy you want him to be. Jayshawn Tate, he's 25 already. How much better can he really get? Can Christian Wood stay healthy? What happens if you don't buy out John Wall? Because you can't really move him. What if the pick doesn't land in the next 4 years? My outlook on the Rockets can change a lot come lottery night. But as of right now, if that pick hits, I think we're in a really good position. I think we even might be a play-in team next year. If that pick doesn't hit, I don't think we're in a bad position. I just think it's going to take a little bit longer. But I think it's a 3-year rebuild. Feel free to come back to this video in 2023 and maybe prove me wrong. But I think that in 2023, the Rockets are going to be back to at least the level they were around like the Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady era, being like a 4 or 5 team. Will they ever be the championship contender they were under the Harden era? No. Will they ever be the team that was led by Hakeem Olajuwon, the Clutch City team? No. but I'm very, very excited for this new era in Rockets basketball. And so I'm very excited for Christian Wood, Kevin Porter Jr., KJ Martin to become like household names in Houston. And, I'm excited to get back to watching healthy Rockets basketball, right? Like, we haven't been able to see that this year. I'm still watching almost every game. I've been missing a few lately just because I'm on Locker Room all the time and you lose track. But, like, I still go back and I'll watch the replays and watch it the next morning or something. And I really think that the future is bright in Houston. Maybe not as bright as some other franchises, but don't count us out. It's Houston versus everybody. It always has been. It always will be.
It's a great way to end it. Love that. And I'm excited for these next few years of Rockets basketball because I'll be watching right along with you. So it'll be fun seeing how that all plays out. Neema, obviously awesome having you on. Thank you so much for coming on, and definitely let our listeners know where they can listen to more of your Rockets takes on Gen Z Rockets.
And I appreciate you for, having me on here and allowing me to talk about my favorite team, a team that, I've been a fan of since I was 4, made me fall in love with basketball, and really is like, as someone who's from Houston, grew up in Houston, my connection with Houston is so much my connection with the Rockets rather than it is with, other things in Houston. And so this is really much a team that means a lot to me. It means a lot to my growth as a person. And so you guys can hear my like Rockets podcast. I'll have a few episodes coming out towards the end of the season. I really didn't want to have any right now just because end of season's happening. There's not really much to talk about until things end. And so I'll have a few coming out. It's Gen Z Rockets, and you can find it on Twitter at Gen Z Rockets. You can also follow me on Twitter at Finding Neema 23. You can go to my link tree. It's in my bio on my. You can go to my link tree. It's in my bio on my Twitter. I have some articles on there as well as links to the Gen Z podcast or Gen Z Rockets podcast. And then if you ever want to talk and just chat with me. I'm on Locker Room almost every day, talking basketball, talking culture, talking music, just talking for the most part. That's what I'm good at. And so that's how I got here.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.